Hello and welcome to my channel. I will today talk about how I got into the whole past life stuff and reincarnation, and I'm actually not the type to be naturally into that because I'm an analytical person. I have to go and find and prove everything. So anyways, I'm telling my story today. It started when I was young. So after 9 years of living with my man, we finally got married and I had my child, and I was just about to go back to work. It was a short maternity leave, only 6 weeks. And first day morning at my place of work, and there is somebody coming into the room as well, a new colleague. And I thought I knew deep inside, oh, there he is. So he walked in, and later he told me he had the same experience. He knew I would be there, and he knew that he knew me. Yeah, this sounds a little bit cheesy so far, but let me tell you one thing. Although the emotions we had and those sensations were not of the kind you might be thinking of. I was always a rather sturdy lady. And this gentleman was very slim built, not very athletic. The head was too big for the body, the eyes too small, the nose too big. With other words, he was absolutely not my type. So I have to say that. But anyways, it became very disturbing, and him being a colleague of mine, there was kind of like no way really to escape that. And we would always gravitate together. There was always really high tension in the air when we were both in a room, and it kind of like disturbed both of our lives. So one day I just told my husband what had happened, and I don't know what I was expecting, but he kind of like confided in me that he basically had an experience like this, and he fell in love with somebody while he was together with me. And at this point, my life really started to unravel. I mean, what the heck? I just got married. I had a little baby. And my husband tells me that he was actually not really into me. Oh my God. And I kind of like had this guy at work where I didn't know where to put those emotions. Anyways, it was very taxing, and I developed some psychosomatic symptoms, and I went to a medical doctor, and my medical doctor looked at me and said, well, you're aiming at the 30, you're getting old. Okay, so I went to an allopathic doctor, and he looked at me and he said, well, I can give you some herbs, that might help with the symptoms, but I think you should see a friend of mine. And he gave me the phone number, and not much about it. So I called that lady, and right off the bat, she threw me with some stuff, where I'm not sure how she could know that, but that's fine. She wasn't cheap. I mean, this is now, 35, 37 years ago. So she wanted $100, an hour, and that was a lot of money back then. And I thought, well, this show better be good. Anyway, so I went there because I was kind of like at the end of my ropes, and she did some automatic writing, and I thought, okay, that's getting interesting here. And I would have totally dismissed all of that if I hadn't felt myself a twitching in my right hand every time she wrote. And I thought, that's strange. Anyways, long story short, she said, that, yeah, I was a candidate for it, and she would offer me to regress me and see if there was a connection in a previous lifetime. And I said, well, what else do you have to lose? A little bit of money. And I went for it. So I will just concentrate on the last lifetime. It was a roller coaster ride. It was just kind of like, whoa, it's all I can say. And without getting into the detail at this point, it was kind of like you had the emotion first, and then the picture formed from the emotion. That's the best I can describe it. Yeah, so there was little old me, and I was a woman back then, young woman. And there was my brother coming, coming towards me, and he just said, you know, run, let's go, run. And I just looked past him to our house, and outside the house, and it was a pub. Outside the house was our dad, and there were some dragoons there. I remember kind of a yellow jackets and swords or something. Anyways, and I just watched, you know, as like one of them bludgeoned our dad. I saw the blood on his head, and it was terrible. My brother grabbed me and we just ran. And we hid somewhere. Was kind of like, I just know I was really so traumatized from watching my dad being murdered that I kind of like, lots of the realities flew past me. But I saw we were some kind of a hideout. It was not something new. We would go there regularly. There were other people. And they did stuff, and they plotted, and they planned. And I kind of like was trudging along and not being really fully aware. And then I noticed some discussions and a little bit of fallout with my brother. So my brother wasn't for what this group was planning. And that's where I started waking up. And I kind of like very passionately, I was for what they were planning. I was just so enraged, you know, finally the numbness had left, and there was only the rage left in me for the murder of our dad. So I know there was this fallout, and then the next thing I have seen, or have been shown, was this field, you know, where other women and me, we were kind of like haying, and there was a rail track, and there was a train coming. And I see the locomotive right in front of me. And I knew the locomotive would leave the tracks. And that's all I knew. And then I felt the sensation of these tons of steel racing towards, jumping the tracks and kind of flipping over and sliding in the grass in the field, and the wagons falling over, you know. And it was kind of like very, very dramatic, obviously. And the other women just said, run, run, and we ran. So we didn't stay there to help, we ran. And the next thing that came was that I was in prison with many of the other women, and there were the men from our group as well. And so the mood, of course, was very depressed, and there were a lot of ugly things happening, rape and so. And then at that point, there were men coming to the prison, and they were picking women to marry them and take them home. So it was basically a cheap, convenient way for a single, usually farmer, to get a house slave. And I was one of them, so I kind of like trudged along, and I know that I was pregnant, and I not only kind of like mourned for my dad, I also mourned for my brother. And I never really actually saw my brother again in that lifetime. I just remember kind of like very, very pregnant, standing at a quay, and the ship was leaving and sailing, and I knew that my brother was on the ship. And the next thing, I think I jumped into the cold water, ocean water, but people pulled me out, and that induced labor, so I gave birth to that child. And then not much time later, I remember myself standing on the top of a cliff, and I remember the scratchy woolen skirt women wore back then, and the wind, and I looked down the cliff, and I saw a really big rock, so it reminded me like being an altar, and I just jumped head first, and I remember my head bursting, and then I was free. So yeah. And it still gets me every time I talk about that, as you notice. So excuse me, Let's clean up a little bit. Yeah, and then I kind of like woke up, and the lady said, just confirmed that, wow, I mean, that was really something. And she told me that from her experience, and she had done many regressions, it was absolutely legit, because there are some physical traits somebody that is regressing um, presents. And I will talk about that in a different video, when I talk about the technique of regressing somebody, or what I have learned. Yeah, but of course, now kind of like I'm all together, and we're having again, and I'm having a cup of tea and with her, and then I said, well, you know what, I want to go out and prove that. I just don't believe that just like this. It's all just nice and pretty, but I will see what I can prove. So that's what I did. So I went and I researched, and I knew how the locomotive looked and the colors of the locomotive, and I discerned that it happened in Ireland. It was an English train, and it happened in Ireland somewhere. And so I researched it from the type of locomotive, so I got the time frame somewhere turn of the last century, 1900s on. Yeah, and I did some more research, oh yeah, there was the Easter Rising, and there was the Civil War, and there were kind of like unrest afterwards, the birth of the IRA, because I didn't want to accept the treaty that was made with Northern Ireland still belonging to to England. So I got into all of that, and then and I went to Ireland. I went to Ireland, and I said, what the heck, just check it out, see what I can find. And at this point, I didn't really know the exact location. So went to Dublin, went to the prison, and that kind of like gave me the chills. So I knew I had been there, or my previous life I had been there, and found a whole lot of little bits and pieces, and also remembered things. Just as a little side story, when I was a teenager, 14, and you just start kind of like getting into music and dancing and whatever, and you have little private parties with your best girlfriend, with your bestie. I kind of like, no other kids there. And I said, Carmen, why do you dance so weird? Move your arms. You're doing great with your legs, but you have to move your arms. And I was basically doing some Irish jigs there to disco music, because that's what came out of my soul. And yeah, and afterwards it all started making sense. And my love for bagpipes, and not to mention my name, but I'll talk about this another time. So anyways, what I found in Ireland was a book that was just published, and this is now a year after my regression. So this book was just published with segregated material, because of course the English kind of like kept materials segregated, so not public. And this book was about derailments in the Troubles, during the Troubles on English military trains. And I believe there were 7 of them, and they were mostly in late winter, early spring. And there was only one, the last one, that was on July 7th, 1923. 1922. So as you can see, that was after the Civil War, so it was definitely in the unrest afterwards. And of course, you do make hay in summer, right? And that was the only one, so I got it nailed to the point. And because it was freshly released segregated material, I knew that there was no way I could have known that before. So that was a pretty overwhelming proof that yes, I had lived before. And as you may have noticed already, so the brother from my twin brother, actually from my last lifetime, was that new colleague I had at work there that started basically the whole unraveling of my life, because it led to that I found out, or my husband told me, that he had an affair and so on and so forth, which of course, you know, resulted in divorce and uprooting my life where I was and transporting me in a total different continent. So yeah, that's it for today. It was a lot, and thanks for watching.